Hello everyone, myself Dr. Andhruti Shah, currently working as an assistant professor, Government Degree College, Bukhar. The paper today we are looking at is 20th century drama, and in this module we are going to talk about Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot. In this lecture module, I am going to speak about Samuel Beckett's life. Then we are going to talk about the major works of Samuel Beckett. Then I am going to throw light on the theatre of absurd. What are the major characteristics of the theatre of absurd? And finally, we are going to do the analysis of the play, and we are going to discuss about the different themes which are being mentioned in the play. Let us first have a look at Samuel Beckett's life. He was Irish. He was born in Ireland, in Dublin, into an Anglo-Irish family. He graduated in modern languages, French and Italian at Dublin Trinity College. Then in 1928, he worked as a lecturer at École Normale. He was influenced by the French existentialism, especially by the work of Camus and Sartre. He was only 25 years of age when he decided to lead his life as a vagabond in Europe, and then finally he moved to Paris in 1936. It was 1936 when the World War II broke out. He fought for the resistance movement in France, and in 1945 he met James Joyce. Beckett basically wrote in two languages, English and French. Waiting for Godot, which was premiered in 1956, was his first and the most famous play. He won Nobel Prize for Literature in 1969. His important works include In Prose, The Proust, which was published in 1931. He has published 3 novels, Murphy in 1935, Malone in 1951, The Unnameable in 1960. His collections of poetry include Echoes, Bones, and Other Precipitates. His important plays are Waiting for Godot, which was written in 1956, Endgame in 1957, Krapp's Last Tape in 1958, Happy Days in 1961, and other works. Samuel Beckett, along with Eugene Ionesco, is considered as the father of theatre of absurd. If we just look towards the historical background of the theatre of absurd, it is the outcome of the World War II, especially the aftermaths of World War II, the worsened situation between Russia and United States. The atrocities which were being used by the Nazis' concentration camp, and the Allies used atomic bomb in Japan. There was a new sense of anguish, helplessness, and despair which generated inside the young generation. The young generation looked towards the word, as they were totally aware of the destructive forces of the scientific knowledge. Apart from that, there was a kind of a lack of moral existence. Morality was something which was being lost because there was a decline in the faith, or there was a decline of religious faith. There was a sense of disillusionment which created a sense of more helplessness, because there was a kind of a difference between the economic and the social progress. A sense of mistrust was there, because the mistrust in the power of reason created a sense of anguish. Existentialism saw man trapped in a hostile world. Human life was meaningless, and this created a sense of confusion, despair, and emptiness. The universe was not rational. It was devoid of any explanation. The universe was seen as absurd. And there was a kind of a development in this philosophical current by Albert Camus and Sartre. Now, if we just look towards the drama or the post-war drama, after the Second World War in 1950, there was a kind of a revival of a drama in British literature, which showed the rejection of the traditional values. There were two major trends which developed in the post-war drama. The first trend dealt with the theatre of anger, and the second one was absurd. So first of all, we will deal with the theatre of anger. The theatre of anger, or the angry young man group, were the educated middle class playwrights. So they were completely, these young people were having a kind of a left wing ideas. The plays which were being performed were not innovative, but they were realistic. They rejected the traditional norms, but they emphasized on a kind of a content. Okay, the content was something which was being emphasized on, and the content was the class consciousness, the left wing class consciousness. It was the frustration of younger generation who rejected the middle class values, and they wanted to expose their unfair situation. The language which was being used was direct, and it was the language which was being used by the working class people. And if the main exponent or the main example of this angry young man and theatre of anger is John Osborne, Look Back in Anger, and that was something which was being performed around 1956. Now let us look towards the second one, that is the theatre of absurd. Now let us look towards the second trend of the drama, that is the theatre of absurd. When we talk about the theatre of absurd was something which was being influenced by the existentialism. There was a kind of an influence of Camus and Sartre. when we just look towards this kind of an influence, there is a kind of a pessimistic view of man's existence. There is no purpose at all. The life is totally absurd. Why? Because it can be considered as the impact of the two world war, because man has seen the two world war, and that is something which is being considered as no faith in the religion, with no belief. Man is someone who is completely lost, and there is a kind of a big existential question, and that is, what is the purpose of human existence? It raised a kind of a question, that is, what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of human existence? When we just look towards the word absurd, absurd means no meaning at all. That is, no rational meaning at all. And Beckett's play want to represent this absurdity, this irrationality of the human existence. And for this, he used a new innovative technique, or for this he used a new form of drama which was known as the theatre of absurd. When we just look towards the term theatre of absurd, the term was something which was being applied by different playwrights, different dramatists, Ionesco, Eugene Neal, Adamov, as well as Samuel Beckett. So absurd is not a kind of a school. So this is what we people can say, ki they did not wanted to create a kind of a school, but all of them were working at their own places, and it actually generated a kind of a form which can be considered as the absurd drama. Now, if we just look towards the kind of when we talk about the term absurd, the absurd term is something which is being taken from the essay written by Albert Camus, and the name of that essay is Myth of Sisyphus. In this, Sisyphus is the protagonist. He's a Greek protagonist who is being asked to roll a rock on the top of the mountain. So the more he pushes it up, the more the rock comes down. He's cursed. So this kind of situation shows the barrenness, the futility of the human existence. Now let's see how the absurd drama is differentiated from the traditional drama. What is the difference between the traditional drama and the absurd drama? Now let us look towards the difference between the traditional drama, traditional form of the drama, and the theatre of absurd. If we just look towards the first segment, that is the plot. So there, in a traditional form of a drama, there is a kind of a story which develops with time. And when we talk about the theatre of absurd, there is no story, no plot. It's a kind of a static word where nothing happens. Now the second point, that is when we look towards the characters. So the characters are very realistic. They actually connect with the audience. They act, there is a certain period of time, and in that manner they perform their action. But when we talk about the characters which are being mentioned in the theatre of absurd, they do not interact with each other. They do not communicate. They just try to break a kind of a silence. So here this is what we people can say, and in the meantime they even they do not communicate with the audience also. There is a sense of alienation, which Brecht has mentioned as a war from dunks effect. Now the time, which is the another feature of a traditional play or a traditional drama, there is a sequence. The events are narrated according to the time. Everything happens on a specific time. But when we just talk about the theater of absurd, we do not have time. The time is like a kind of a nightmare. It's something which is very situational, or they do not exist in the time. They do not remember their past, they do not remember their purpose. The characters, they do have a kind of a weak memory. The next feature of a traditional drama is the language. When the characters communicate, they communicate and make a kind of a proper sense between each other. On the other hand, when we people are talking about the theater of absurd, no language is being used. Silence, pauses is something which is being used. Apart from that, if they will speak, the language which is being used is gibberish. So these are some of the major differences. And if we just look towards a traditional form of a drama is something which has a kind of a beginning, it has a kind of a middle, it has a kind of an end. There is a kind of a rising action, there is a kind of a falling action, and a kind of a climax in the traditional form of a drama. But when it is being compared with the theater of absurd, there is no rising action, there is no there is no beginning, there is no end. The play doesn't end. It's something, a kind of a situation which is being repeated. Things are kept as it is. It actually wanted to show the kind of absurdity. So this is something which is a major difference between the traditional form of the drama and the theater of absurd. Now we will just move towards the next segment, in which we are going to talk about Waiting for Godot. Let's talk about Waiting for Godot. Waiting for Godot was actually written in French language. The title was An Attendant Godot. Later, it was being translated into English by Samuel Beckett himself. It was first performed in London. Waiting for Godot was one of the most revolutionary play of the 20th century. In this play, Beckett experimented with a minimalism, a technique employed to create an artistic effect with minimum possible means. When the play was first performed, many spectators left the theatre because they could not understand anything. The audience was totally confused at the strange dialogues, characterization, and the lack of plot or the story. Some critics see the play as a reflection of Beckett's own military experience during the Second World War. The play Waiting for Godot is a tragicomedy in 2 acts. It has only 5 characters who appears on stage. The 6th character, Godot, is someone who doesn't appear at stage at all. The title refers to the protagonist waiting endlessly for the Godot. Now, let us look at the summary of the play. The play is something which has been divided into 2 acts. So first of all, I am going to give you the summary of Act 1 as well as the analysis of the Act 1, and then I am going to talk about the Act 2. So let's begin with the first act. The setting, the first act begins in the evening on a lonely country road near the tree with no leaves. A middle-aged tramp, Estragon, is seated on a low mound, struggling to take off his boots. When Vladimir arrives, Estragon gives up his frustrated attempts, exclaiming, "Nothing to be done." His words resound throughout the play, emphasizing on the absurdity of life. Vladimir surprisingly comes up with a rather strange but a philosophical response. "I am beginning to come around to the opinion. All my life I have tried to put it from me, saying, 'Vladimir, be reasonable. You haven't yet tried everything.'" So critics have remarked that Beckett creates the right atmosphere of the play with Vladimir abstract dialogue. It reflects the true nature of the human existence in the modern age. Man seems to be unable to find a worthy reason to live happily. Beckett presents his character as a prototype of a post-war modern age man. They are always tormented with worries of disease, poverty, homelessness, hunger, suffering, and other issues. Estragon is dressed in rags and was beaten. He keeps complaining about pain in his feet. Vladimir peers inside his hat for a while and refers to his itching bladder illness. They try to pass the time by exchanging hat, playing games. They converse on various topics and reveal that they are waiting for a man named Godot. While they wait, two other men enter, that is Pozzo and Lucky. They share a master-slave relationship. Pozzo is on his way to the market to sell his slave, Lucky. The tramp's encounter with the old couple, Pozzo and Lucky, seems symbolic in many ways. Beckett seems to suggest that human beings are fated to undergo suffering in different ways. Pozzo is a very tyrant master, and Lucky is someone who is still dependable on Pozzo. Even Pozzo is tyrannical in nature, Lucky is not leaving the Pozzo. So again, the situation is something which is talking about the absurdity of the life. The first act ends up with the arrival of the boy, the messenger, Godot. He informs them that Godot is unable to come, but he will meet them surely next day. The boys leave and they decide to leave the place. However, the characters, they do not move. There is no advancement of the plot in the first act. Through Vladimir and Estragon, Pozzo and Lucky, Beckett seems to highlight the human condition prevalent during the modern age. Man, though disappointed and frustrated with life, does nothing to change his condition. He waits passively and relies on hope to sustain him and enable him to face the future. So again, through the Act 1 itself, it is being defined that there is a kind of an absurdity. Nothing is happening, nothing is changing, but still the characters, they rely on a kind of a hope, and that hope is something which can be considered as a new beginning in the life itself, in their life itself. Apart from this, we have seen one more thing, that in Act 1, the two characters even try to commit a suicide, but they are unable to do this. So it is reflected in such a kind of a manner where nothing could be done. They are just based on a kind of a hope, and they think that once Godot will arrive, all their problems are going to come to an end. Now let's look towards Act 2. So when we just talk about Act 2, the second act is set in the same surrounding. The tree has sprouted 4 or 5 leaves. Estragon has left his boots there in the previous night. Vladimir enters agitated and starts singing about a dog beaten to death because it stole a crust of bread. Soon Estragon enters. He is sad because he is beaten again the previous night. Vladimir prompts him to recollect the events of the previous day. Estragon is unsure about the passage of time. He doesn't remember anything. Vladimir suggests helping Estragon to put his boots again. Estragon says that the boots are not his. This leads them to an absurd thought. Pozzo and Lucky appears again as master and slave. But this time the condition is different. Pozzo is blind and Lucky is not able to hear anything. Pozzo and Lucky appears as master and slave again. Pozzo, who is now blind, falls down and calls for the help. Estragon again mistakes him to be Godot. The tramp wonder why Lucky haven't escaped from the blind Pozzo. Instead of helping Pozzo, he chats with Estragon, contemplating about their fates. Pozzo keeps on calling out for help and offers up to 200 francs. This spurs Vladimir to take action. He says, "Let's do something while we have a chance." It's not every day that we are needed, not needed that we personally are needed. Others would meet the case equally well, if not better, to all mankind. They were addressed those cries for help still ringing in our ears. But at this place, at this moment of time, all mankind is in us, whether we like it or not. Let us make the most of it before it's too late. Let us represent worthily for once the foul brood to the cruel fate consigned us. Vladimir fails in his attempt and falls down calling for help. The scene is extremely tragicomic, with 3 of them lying on the ground calling for help. The tramp get up on their own after some times to help Pozzo to get up. Estragon wakes up, Lucky, who is mute, then master and slave exit. It's strange that only Vladimir remembers the event of the previous day. The boy returns in the end of Act 2 with a message from the Godot again, asking for Mr. Albert. The boy doesn't recognize Vladimir, but he says that Godot will surely meet them the next day. Boy reveals that Godot has a white beard and runs off from the stage. The play ends with the tramps standing in front of the tree, seriously considering the possibilities of hanging themselves. But these two tramps do not have any rope. So they think of bringing the rope next day. Vladimir says that they will not hang themselves until or unless Godot arrives in order to save them. Vladimir helplessness word confirms the endless fate. Now, if you just look towards the kind of the conclusion which are being mentioned in the text itself, this is what Vladimir says. We wait. We are bored. He throws up his hand. No, don't protest. We are bored to death. There is no denying in it. Good. A diversion comes along. And what do? We let it go to waste. Come, let's get to work. He advances toward the heap, stops in his strides. In an instant, all will vanish, and we will alone once more in the midst of nothingness. So here again the end of the play suggests the infinite possibilities of waiting. Apart from this is what it is being shown, that human beings are so opposed to change that they would rather prefer inactive or unproductive. When we just look towards the character of Vladimir and Estragon, they actually portray the modern man. They represent the modern man itself. Even though the play is a tragicomedy, but it actually mirrors the human existence. Now let's look towards the theme of the play. The play has several themes. The main theme of the play is waiting. It has alienation, anxiety, nihilism. There is an approach toward nihilism. It represents the boredom of the life. Again, it represents the vain expectations. There is a theme of friendship which is being reflected in the play itself, and so on. The play doesn't come to an end. What is much more fascinating about Waiting for Godot is that the play Waiting for Godot never ends. So again, this play is something which is being kept in front of everyone to explore new possibilities. By this words, I just end up my lecture. Hope you have understood the lecture well. Thank you.